What a week. Every week we come here, we say, what a week.
This has been a momentous week, and so much going on. And it's all, however, in one direction. And
Yeah.
I think this is the thing to understand. I mean, it's been in some ways rather amusing to see the
Yeah.
sort of anger and spluttering that's coming from certain quarters. But, if foreign policy is conducted in an irrational way,
Hmm.
it leads to inevitable outcomes. And I think this is the thing. By the way, I've always one of the things is I should just quickly in parentheses. One of the things I've always been attracted to about Chinese culture. I should say I've also done quite a bit of reading of Chinese philosophy. Um, it's always intensely rational.
Yeah.
It's there's none of the weird mysticism that you get in some
Uh-huh.
people. I mean, it's very, very. I mean, I don't know how you pronounce his name, Kung Fu Tse,
Uh-huh.
the Confucius. If
Uh-huh.
you read
Kung,
Analect, which of course I've only
Kung
read
Fu
in
Zi. Yeah. Uh-huh.
English,
Yeah.
in English, I mean, it's so it's very clear, very simple, very humane,
Hmm.
very wonderful,
Yeah.
very profound in places, but it's very sane. I mean, this is you read so many Western philosophers, particularly modern Western philosophers, and you do really wonder sometimes what they've been smoking. And anyway, but it's very much a characteristic of Chinese civilization. It seems to be that you take a very calm, steady approach to things, and I think it's reflected very much in Chinese governance. I've
Hmm.
said this before, and I think I've said this to you. I've never found China. You said China's a difficult country to understand
Understand.
in
Mhm.
terms of its size, its complexity, the way the economy works, the structure, all of that. But the Chinese mind, I don't think it is because it's
Mhm.
very clear, very
Mhm.
straightforward, very open, actually.
Uh-huh.
Um, not at all, so full of monsters, if I can put it like that, which
Uh-huh.
you do find in other civilizations,
Yeah.
including my own, by the way, the Greek one.
I think the Chinese ruling class benefited quite a bit from that period. 2000, 2500
Mm.
before, earlier. Or they have a period, I think you're familiar with the spring and autumn. I don't know how to
Absolutely.
translate that period
That's
with a
that
lot.
that is how it's translated. It's spring and
Okay.
autumn in the West too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And during that
yeah,
time, there was like probably over 100 school of thoughts on how to
yeah.
run the country. I mean, there's just a huge amount of debate and
Mm, mm,
thinking and the analysis.
mm.
And I think over the years that they tried the ruling class tried different. They tried different way of doing it. And in the end, the Confucius one basically
Yeah,
win because it's probably is the one that worked best for them.
yeah,
So I think that's probably part of the reason because it's
yeah.
worked best simply because it has the thing you're talking about, very simple, very straightforward, and in the long run it works. And I
Yeah.
think that's probably part of it. It's a working
Yeah.
process that took years, took
Yeah,
thousands of years.
absolutely. Well, that's it. There's a tradition of statescraft which is longer and deeper than that of any other country. And
Yeah.
it's interesting to see that China today has inherited that. And when I went to China in 2017, I was very struck by how conscious the Chinese people are, not just the leaders, but all the Chinese people are, that they are part of this culture and how proud they are of it, as they should be.
Yeah. Yeah, Jeffrey Sachs actually talked about that at one point. He was in,
Yeah.
I think Athens, was talking about
Mm.
some forums, and he said actually, if you look at today's China, today's Russia, they're not that different from, a few hundred years ago. I mean,
No,
fundamentally, they are not.
no, no, no. It's
Yeah,
true. It's true. I
yeah,
mean, the Russians obviously have a very different culture and a very
uh-huh,
different. I mean, it's compatible. It's
yeah,
more passion. It's more. I don't know. It's wilder than the
yeah,
Chinese,
yeah,
which reflects their history, of course.
hmm, yeah,
Um, but and they're more emotional in their conduct of their policies than the Chinese are. I mean, you
yeah,
can see this. You can see
yeah,
this in the United Nations. I mean, Wang Yi talks very sensibly, very sanely, very calmly. Whereas Lavrov will sometimes be very blustering and angry, or appear to be quite angry. But they are compatible.
Yeah.
And I think, by the way, that is something the Russians have discovered, very much to their surprise, over the last couple of years. We'll discuss this more deeply in our program. That now that they've actually fully committed to the relationship with China, they discover that they like it. It was something that, because you see, they oriented themselves for centuries towards Europe, and they'd assume Europe was the place they should be. And now that they work with China, they find they can talk with the Chinese, they can come to agreements, they can do all kinds of things. And it's, anyway, let's talk about these.
Okay. So for the past week, I mean, ever since we talked last week, I think around that time, there has been extraordinary events, right? There are 4 assassination attempts: MBS, Vucic, Faisal, Houthi spokesperson, yeah, and 2 coup attempts: the Turkey Democratic Republic of Congo, and the helicopter crash of Raisi, the president of Iran. And so all these, what your take? Are these just individual separated events, or something is going on here?
It's difficult to say because, of course, we don't have all of the details about all of them. I suspect that the one where we're going to find out a lot ultimately is the one in Slovakia, because though I've never been to Slovakia, friends of mine have been, many friends. My brother, I believe, has been there. And I know that it's a very functional country. It has proper police and security services. It's got a proper judiciary. It will carry out proper investigations. And it's got friends that it can call on for help: Russia, China, others, and which will not be intimidated to call on for help. And very interestingly, they're now coming forward and they're saying that they think that the assassination attempt on Fico was not the result of one lone individual. In fact, there seems to have been a group involved. And they've pointed out that the attempted murderers, the assassins' Facebook page was deleted by someone who was not him, obviously, because he'd been detained, and not his wife. They've called her in, and apparently they're satisfied by that. And that there are now indications that a wider conspiracy was involved. So if that's true with the Fico case, it opens up possibilities about all of the others. Now, if we talk about Saudi Arabia, the Saudis are never going to tell us exactly what happened, because that's the nature of Saudi Arabia. They're very secretive about assassination attempts on their leaders. If we're talking about the Houthis, it's not difficult to imagine who would be behind an assassination attempt there, because the United States and Israel are certainly involved. If we're talking about Vucic in Yugoslavia, again, we don't know many details, but we might start to find things out. The mystery one is Raisi in Iran. There are lots of unanswered questions about that. At the moment, it doesn't look exactly like an assassination attempt, but there are unanswered questions. I mean, why was he traveling on an ancient helicopter dating from the time of the Shah of Iran over mountainous country in fog? I mean, it seems astonishing. And why did he have his own foreign minister there? And so, there are questions, there are unanswered questions about this. And of course, he was visiting a country, Azerbaijan, where the United States and Israel have had a long footprint. They have a presence, and they probably have contacts with the local officials, with some local officials. So I don't want to jump and say that all of these different events are connected, but it's possible they are connected. It's not impossible. And of course, as you correctly say, an attempted coup in Turkey, which seems to have been detected, and again, one wonders how it was detected very quickly, and an attempted coup in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is one of the biggest, most important countries in Africa, and one that has been increasingly improving its relations with China, especially, I understand, and which has, enormous mineral wealth, which is contested by the great powers. Now, you can perhaps also add to this roll call the still unresolved and unanswered questions about the Crocus City Hall attack in Moscow a few weeks ago. Now, if these events are all connected, and if we are looking at a pattern here, and perhaps we are, then it suggests that someone is becoming very desperate indeed.
Yeah, yes.
And they're
Yeah.
taking extreme steps to try to resolve their problems by killing people. I have to say that the people who we might think could be responsible for these things, the Americans and, of course, the Israelis, have a very long history of trying to carry out assassinations. This would not be new for them. So I'm afraid they have a record here. Israel is quite open about the fact. The United States at various times pretends that it doesn't do this, but of course it does. So, it would suggest growing desperation and growing alarm. And given the way in which events are shaping around the world, you can see why that might be so. And note in particular that there have been attacks on two key leaders in two of the new BRICS states. Well, attacks. The one in Saudi Arabia, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, the man who is widely credited with engineering Saudi Arabia's diplomatic revolution, its rapprochement with Iran, its new links with China and Russia, it's joining the BRICS, all of that. And also, of course, Raisi of Iran, if it is an assassination, if it was an assassination, he is another leader of a BRIC state as well, and somebody who was a very successful diplomat for his country, who both the Chinese and the Russian governments came to like and trust, a fact reflected in the statements they have issued following his death. So, it's not difficult to guess who might be involved and who would be responsible. And of course, it is interesting that all of these events have taken place in countries which the United States and the Atlantic bloc look like they're becoming increasingly worried about. As I said, it's a desperate thing to start to do. And, well, rather concerning if this is what they're up to, but there we are.
Yeah, I think both in Houthis and the Democratic Republican Congo, they already arrested some people and they arrested some Americans. And I think in Houthis' case, some British also.
Yeah.
But so that we know that the Americans are more or less involved. And the MBS just canceled his trip to Japan. Now, the official reason is his father, the king, is very ill, which could be a reason. But also the Chinese media speculated that he probably doesn't feel real safe. I mean, Japan, after all, is also a U.S. ally. Either on his way there or after, more likely after he leave or something on his way out or something. I actually think it's good for him to cancel that. I mean, that would be that kind of caution they need to do that, considering in particular if his father, is going to be gone soon. Yeah, he's going to be the new king. And then the Chinese media also pointed out all these happened right after Xi Jinping's visit to Europe, and of course, particularly Xi Jinping and Putin's meeting, right? That they have this extraordinary joint statement. So the Chinese media does not believe this is all coincidence. They think there's somebody behind it, and we all know who they are. But my concern is they're not. I mean, in particular, like Israel. The thinking the reason why the helicopter crash makes so much suspicion is that when Israel attacked the Iranian embassy, they were trying to stir up. Of course, they want to pull the U.S. in, but they failed that. Does it mean they just stop there? I don't think so. I think they will continue to try something. And that's why when this happened, lots of people saying, okay, now here we come again. The Israel just not going to stop until they get the U.S. in. So that's a strong motivation, right? There's for that. And then also the other aspect of it is just if these things keep on happening, there will be some big thing happen in the end, isn't it? That's very worrying. What do you think?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I mean, let's just go over and recap on some of these things. Let's start with MBS because, of course, the points that you're making are very important. I mean, one of the reasons, if this, one of the reasons that there might have been an assassination attempt on him is that if the king, his father, is indeed very ill, then of course he's going to succeed to the throne. He's the crown prince. So if some people want to prevent that from happening, then that will be a particularly strong reason why they might want to put him out of the way. Now, that makes complete sense to me. And you're absolutely right. I mean, traveling to Japan, of all places, would not be a wise thing at all. All the more so given that in Japan, there has been a history of political assassinations. Shinzo Abe, for example, was assassinated, was it a year ago, 2 years ago? I can't remember exactly when. So, I think he's entirely correct to stay in Saudi Arabia. And he's entirely correct to take precautions. And besides, he needs to navigate, the complex period of the succession to his father, which perhaps is not that far away. So that is the first thing. The second point is obviously, if we're going back to Iran and Israel's motivations, they have overwhelming motivations to want to get rid of Raisi. One of them is what you said, that they want to get the United States involved in their conflict in the Middle East. And this is why they attacked the embassy in Damascus, which undoubtedly they did, I think, with the intention of provoking a major crisis with Iran. I don't have any doubt about that at all, by the way. So they absolutely want to do that. The Biden administration tried to avoid the crisis escalating in that sort of way. But the Israelis might want to stir up things again. And that would be a reason perhaps to go after the president of Iran in order to create another crisis between Israel and Iran, one which would draw in the United States. There's a further reason why Israel might have gone after Raisi, and that is the growing shadow of Iran. The war that Israel has been fighting is not going well. And they're still bogged down in Gaza. There's no sign that Hamas is going to be destroyed or defeated. In fact, it appears to be gaining strength. They've now been obviously indicted, or rather the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court wants indictments against Netanyahu and the defense minister. So there's all that tension. But also they must be very troubled about those exchanges of missiles that took place a few weeks ago, because they demonstrated that Iran does have the capability to launch missile strikes into Israel itself. So they're worried about Iran, and they would have been worried about Raisi himself, because what Raisi has been very successful in doing is in building these relationships with all these various countries, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, all of the others. He's been at the forefront of Iran's diplomatic offensive, if you like, in the Middle East. And he's also, by the way, a fact that isn't widely known, presided over a significant recovery in the Iranian economy, which has been based on growing trade with China in particular, but also trade with India and other countries too. Yeah. So he is a pivotal person. And given the growth of Iranian power, which there has been, get him out of the way, remove him from the scene. Also, hope that by doing so, you can destabilize the internal situation in Iran itself. And there have already been articles appearing in the British media from all the usual people saying that this is the moment to go after Iran, to take, to make the opportunity to change the events there, the political system there, and, well, weaken Iran. And weaken Iran before these linkages between Iran and China, Iran and Russia, Iran and the whole of the Eurasian system really consolidate and become too strong. So you can see that as well. Now, as to your third point, that all of this sooner or later is going to end in a smash. Absolutely. You can't go around taking shots at world leaders and organizing coups in various countries without other countries eventually responding and retaliating against you. And of course, if it's discovered as well, I mean, organizing the assassination of a head of state or a head of government is an act of war.
Yeah.
It demonstrates the growing desperation and recklessness of the leaders of the West, if this is indeed what they're doing. And it shows how completely out of control they've become. Now, again, we have to be careful here because we don't yet know exactly how deep the involvement was. But, this all might be a coincidence, but coincidences on this scale, they do beg questions.
Yeah, because another coincidence is just happened that Fiesel and Raisi are both planning to visit China soon. I think Fiesel was scheduled in June, I believe. And yeah.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot of a coincidence.